Welcome back. The road to the decipherment of hieroglyphs was not a short one. When the Rosetta Stone was discovered, everyone thought the code will be cracked quickly. But it wasn't. It took more than 20 years till someone could finally read an ancient Egyptian inscription. Everyone had been making the big mistake, assuming that the language was primarily ideographic, picture writing. Even as Thomas Young and Jean-Francois Champollion were figuring out the alphabet, they both made that mistake. Today, we'll see how Champollion made the big breakthrough and became the first man in 2,000 years to read hieroglyphs. As you'll remember, Champollion and Young were competing to be the first to decipher hieroglyphs. But this was more than a matter of academics. France and England were at war. William Banks, an Englishman, gave Young, another Englishman, the inscription on his obelisk and also the king's list from Abydos. Young, a gentleman, shared the information with Champollion. Champollion, however, was far more selfish and even denied that Young was the first to figure out an alphabet. In 1822, Champollion published his Lettre à Monsieur Dacier, which proclaimed that he had cracked the code and could read hieroglyphs. Dacier was the secretary of the Academy of Inscriptions and Literature. In it, Champollion claimed to be able to translate. The truth is, he couldn't. He had taken the alphabet further than Young, figured out the names of more kings, but like Young, he still believed that hieroglyphs are ideographic, and he really didn't understand how the language works. In his Lettre, he didn't acknowledge Young's contribution to the endeavor, and he never would. Around the time that Champollion was wrongly claiming he could translate ancient Egyptian, his friend, Jean-Nicolas Hillot, visited him. This will be crucial. Hillot was a member of the team that Banks hired to copy inscriptions in Egypt. When Banks returned to Abu Simbel for the second time in 1819, he intended to hire enough men to clear the sand and enter the temple. He was disappointed to discover that Belzoni had beaten him to that honor. But there was still plenty of glory left for Banks. Unlike Belzoni, Banks was a scholar at heart, interested in information more than treasure. So Banks brought with him a team of artists and architects to help copy the inscriptions in the temple. Remember, this is before tourism. There were no restaurants, not even villages nearby. Banks brought a provision ship with chickens, goats, and all the food they would need. There was no light inside the deep rock-cut temple. So they gathered palm fronds and attached dozens of candles to them so they could copy the inscriptions. Banks and his team spent weeks copying the inscriptions and scenes of Ramses at the Battle of Kadesh that covered the walls of Abu Simbel. But they didn't know it was Ramses. No one could translate hieroglyphs yet. But that would soon change. Hillot showed Champollion his drawings of Abu Simbel. Inside one of the cartouches he had copied are 4 important hieroglyphs. Now, this is where Champollion's knowledge of Coptic becomes crucial. He sees the circle and figures out it's the sun. But he also knows that the Coptic word for sun is Ra. Now he's left with 3 hieroglyphs to decipher. From his alphabet, he also knows that the last 2 hieroglyphs are S's. So he has Ra blank Sissus, Ra Sissus. Champollion also knows from classical sources that there was a King Ramses. So he guesses that the unknown sign is an M. He's very close. The unknown sign is really an MS biliteral, but still, he has the name correct, Ramses. Hillot has his drawings from other sites as well, and he shows Champollion another cartouche. It was known that the ibis represented the god Thoth. And with the other hieroglyphs, he comes up with Thothmosis, another king's name known from the classical writers. But this isn't the breakthrough yet. So far, he just has another name figured out. The breakthrough is when Champollion realizes that Mesis is very much like the Coptic word for birth, Misa. Now the names of Ramses and Thothmosis don't just have phonetic value. They mean something. Ra is born. Thoth is born. The phonemes spell out words with meanings. Hieroglyphs aren't just ideographic. The big mistake is over. Champollion rushes over to his brother's house and announces, "I've done it," and faints. He is so overcome and exhausted that he remains in bed for 5 days. When he finally gets out of bed and resumes work, Champollion starts reading out loud all the words he has on the Rosetta Stone and listens for Coptic matches. Soon he has dozens and dozens of words. Now he really can translate hieroglyphs. It's all due to Banks taking draftsmen with him to the temples and tombs of Egypt to copy inscriptions that can be now read. Champollion published his findings in 1824 in his Précis du système hiéroglyphique des anciens Égyptiens, and never credited Young, who was always a gentleman in the race to decipher. Even Champollion's teacher and mentor, Sylvestre de Sacy, warned Young early on that Champollion would try to claim all the credit. So when Young published his findings in 1823, he did so under the title An Account of Some Recent Discoveries in Hieroglyphical Literature and Egyptian Antiquities, including the author's original alphabet as extended by Monsieur Champollion. With Champollion's breakthrough, the world now knew that Ramses the Great built the Temple of Abu Simbel, and that not all hieroglyph inscriptions were religious mystical texts. Sometimes hieroglyphs were telling about a battle. Sometimes they were a mere boast of a long-dead pharaoh of having built a temple. And Athanasius Kirch's fantasy translations of the obelisks of Rome were revealed to be just that, pure fantasy. Still, not everyone was convinced that Champollion had really cracked the code. For nearly 10 years, there were still some scholars who were holdouts and refused to accept Champollion's system of translation. In the end, though, everyone had to agree. The evidence was just too great. Thanks to Young and Champollion, we can learn the ancient Egyptian language. So get your scribal pens and ink ready. We still have some hieroglyph work to do. We should begin by translating the homework sentences. First was, "The moon rises in the sky." Well, we know we start with the verb. We had this verb in our very first hieroglyphic sentence, Weben Reim Pet, the sun is shining or rising in the sky. So we start with Weben. Next, we need the moon. That's yeah. Our word for in is the owl, so we add that. Now all we need is the word for sky. Pet. The moon rises in the sky. Weben yeah em pet. And that's our first sentence. Good. My guess is that this is now becoming easy for you. If you've been doing your homework, you remember most of the vocabulary words and don't have to look everything up. You know the verb comes first, and you know how to group signs. I'm going slowly because I don't want anyone to get lost. Let's do the next sentence. The scribe is silent day and night. First, the verb. Ger, to be silent, with the hand to the mouth determinative. Add the subject scribe. That's sesh. Next, we need day, which is heru, good. There's no conjunction and in Middle Egyptian, so we just add night. Our word henna together with really won't do it. We don't want to say the scribe is silent day together with the night. It doesn't work. So we just put day and night together. The scribe is silent day and night. Ger, sesh, haru, gera. Good. And that's it. Sometimes they would add the owl M before day and night, so it would read by day and by night. Remember, there are no formal written rules of grammar yet. Last homework sentence. This poor man knows a plan. Verb first, right? Rech, to know. Next, our subject, the poor man. Nejes is poor man. Now we add this, pen, because it's masculine. Good. Plan is secher, that's right. And we've got it. This poor man knows a plan. Rech nejes pen secher. Now I'd like to show you some biliteral signs that represent two sounds, one after the other. When we talked about Champollion's breakthrough, his aha moment, we saw that the hieroglyph that looks like the McDonald's sign was crucial. The sign represents animal skins drying on a rack, but it represents the sounds M and S, one after the other. Today, I'd like to show you some more biliterals. Biliterals are a little difficult to remember because there are so many of them. To make them easier, we organize them into groups that end with the same sound. Today, we'll learn the A family, biliterals that end with the sound A. So we'll see hieroglyphs that represent the sounds ba, ka, sa, ta, cha, and so on. Don't try to memorize them. You'll learn them when you see them in words and also by writing them. There are 4 different birds in the A family. Let's do them together in alphabetical order. This is the ba biliteral. His most distinctive feature is what I call the leash around his neck. But he also has a long beak. In a minute, I'll show you another similar bird, a pin-tailed duck. I'm going to suggest that you write the ba bird the same way as the pin-tailed duck and then just add the leash and the long bill. Let's first look at the pa hieroglyph. I'm taking them in alphabetical order. I call him the pa bird because he represents the sounds P and A together. It's as if you wrote the rectangle P and the vulture A together. It's an important hieroglyph because it's used so often. Let me show you how to draw it. He's a flying duck. Start with the head. Then extend the body. Next, more body and a tail. Now a wing. Last, the second wing and feet. That's the pa bird. You have this one in our exercise book, along with other difficult hieroglyphs to draw, so don't worry if you don't get it right now. Here's the sa bird. He's a very important bird. As I said, he's a pin-tailed duck, used a lot. He's also the word for sun, S-O-N. Remember when we talked about Horopalo's book on hieroglyphs and how he said that the duck represents the word sun because they fight so fiercely for their offspring? He was right about the meaning, but wrong about the reason. The duck represents the sound sa, which was the ancient Egyptian word for sun. You will see this hieroglyph often because one of the pharaoh's names was always preceded by Sa-Re, son of the sun god Re. Notice that they just used the sun determinative for Re, the god. Everyone knew what it meant, so there was no need to write it out with the god determinative. Let me show you how to draw the sa bird. Start with the head and body. Next, add feet. Last, complete the top of the body and give him a wing and a tail. He's the one that I said is similar enough to the ba bird that you can do some cosmetic changes and get away with it. Just add a leash and the long bill for the sa hieroglyph, and then you'll have the ba hieroglyph. It works. Here's the cha bird, and his distinctive feature is that he looks like he's coming in for a landing on water. He's actually a duckling. He too is important, but we'll see him often. Start with the head and lower body. Next, complete the little wings and body. Finally, give him some feet. You may be thinking that the cha bird looks like a triliteral. After all, if we wrote out the sound, we would write cha, and that looks like three sounds. Ch, T, CH, and an A, to ch, ah. No, it's really only two sounds. The ch is only one sound. It may be spelled TCH, but it's one sound. It's made by expelling air once through your teeth while the tip of your tongue is touching the roof of your mouth. Try it. Ch, ch. In English, we need three letters to represent one sound, but it is still just one sound. It's similar to our alphabetic pool hieroglyph for SH. We need two letters to represent it, the S and the H, but it's one sound. Sh. As we learn words that use these bird biliterals, you'll see just how wrong everyone was when they thought hieroglyphs were only ideographic. None of these bird hieroglyphs represent the concept of a bird. They're purely phonetic. This will be reinforced when we see biliterals used in words. But let's complete the A family. Pronounced cha, this is a lotus plant. When it stands alone, it's often the hieroglyph for 1,000. Do you remember the 6,000 captives on the Narmer palette, where there were 6 papyrus plants to indicate the 6,000? Well, this later evolved into the lotus plant. Let me show you the cha biliteral in action, so you can see how biliterals are used in words. That's how you learn them. This word was pronounced secha. The S in front of the biliteral is our usual folded cloth S. Once you remember that the next hieroglyph is the cha biliteral, you realize that the A, the vulture after it, is a phonetic complement. It helps you remember the biliteral's pronunciation. The hand to the mouth, that's a determinative that suggests the word has something to do with speech or thinking, and it does. The word means to remember. So we would pronounce this word secha. Here's a curious-looking hieroglyph. It's pronounced ja and is a bow fire drill. Using a bow, you rapidly turn the obelisk-shaped piece of wood in a smaller block of wood. The friction generates enough heat to start a fire. This biliteral is pronounced ea. It's a wooden column. It's also used vertically. You'll see it upright. Let's do another one. It's pronounced ha, and it's obviously plants. But here, we're only concerned about the sound, ha. This one I call the field goal sign, because it looks like the indication referees give in football games when a field goal is successfully completed. It's pronounced ka, and it's also the word for soul. There were several aspects to a person, and the ka was a kind of double for the body. The wealthy Egyptians even had ka statues. In case something actually happened to their body, the statue could take the place of the body. We'll talk a lot about this later, when you learn to translate the prayers recited by ka priests. There's a fabulous wood statue of King Hor of the Middle Kingdom. It's in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and people always wonder what the arms are doing on his head. Well, now we know. It's a label for the gods, proclaiming that this is the Ka statue of King Hor. But just having your Ka in the next world wasn't enough for immortality. You as a person were composed of several elements, and you needed them all. A crucial part of you was your ba. This was your personality, what made you you. Often papyri showed the deceased as having the body of a bird and the head of a person. That's the ba. Sometimes it's spelled out with a ba bird biliteral. Let's try another biliteral. This is the ma biliteral, and it's a sickle. It too is an important hieroglyph because it's part of the word for true and truth. There were several ways of writing the word for truth, and most involved the ma biliteral. Let me show you a common one. The sickle of this course, the ma biliteral. The long, thin rectangle is the base on which a statue stood, and that's another way of writing the M. We remember that. It's equivalent to the owl. So that's a phonetic complement. The arm is usually an eh sound, but the word for truth is usually transliterated as ma'at. You can see the loaf T at the end. We'll soon see the sickle in another word, and it'll become more and more familiar to you. Don't worry. This hieroglyph is of plants growing in a field, and it's pronounced sha. This one, pronounced ta. And we think the hieroglyph depicts a potter's kiln, but I'm not sure about this one. Just one more biliteral. Hang in there. This one is a rope with a loop, and it's pronounced wa. From the names Ptolemy and Cleopatra, you'll remember that by Greek times, it was also used as the letter O. There are a couple of others in the A family of biliterals, but they're rarely used. We come across them when we're translating. We can learn them then. Now, for some words that use the biliterals. This is the way you'll learn them. This is a good one to start with. It'll reinforce how biliterals are used in words. First, how would you pronounce it? Well, here's how you should be thinking. I haven't seen that I hieroglyph yet. I bet it's a determinative. It is, even though it comes in the middle of the word, which is unusual. So we don't pronounce it. It'll just help indicate the meaning of the word. Next important point to remember, biliterals often have phonetic complements, an alphabetic hieroglyph that helps you remember the biliteral sound. But it's not pronounced, as in the word for remember that we just saw. We have that here. The sickle is pronounced ma and has a phonetic complement, a silent vulture. But there are two vultures. That means the word is pronounced ma'a. The sickle in the first vulture is ma, but when we add the second vulture, we get ma'a. The I determinative shows us it has something to do with seeing. Indeed, it's the verb to see. To help you learn biliterals, I suggest you make a chart of them. For now, we only have the A family. So take a sheet of paper and write A on the top with a vulture next to it, since that's the A sound. Then below, draw the biliterals in alphabetical order, with their sounds written next to them. The only exception to the alphabetical order is that it might be good to start with the first four birds in the A family. They will be easy to remember that way. Put the birds together. So you'll have ba, pa, sa, and cha birds up on top of the chart. Then complete the rest of the chart with the A family in alphabetical order. Also, to help remember them, you'll be adding the vocabulary words that contain the biliterals to your dictionaries. All this will help them sink in. Don't feel overwhelmed. You'll get it. Our new word, ma'a, to see, will go on the M page, along with our owl and other words beginning with the sound m. Our word to remember, secha, will go on the S page. This will help us learn how to write the biliterals and also to remember their sounds. Let's try another word with a biliteral. Let's pronounce it. We have the ba bird with no phonetic complements, followed by the basket K. So it's just bak. That's right. The man determinative tells us it's a person. The word means manservant. We'll add this to our B page in the dictionary. What do you think the word for maidservant would be? Same as manservant, but with a feminine T and a female determinative. Good. It's pronounced baket. This word sometimes appears in royal names. For example, one of Akhenaten's daughters was named Bakhet-Aten, servant of the Aten. Okay, pronounce this one. We have the cha biliteral and a T, so it looks like chat. But it also is sometimes written with a double reed, which has a Y sound, so we usually say chati for this word. So even though it looks as if it's feminine, it isn't, because it really ends in a double reed. The word means vizier. In ancient Egypt, the vizier was like the prime minister. He was the second highest official in Egypt after the pharaoh. Sometimes there were two viziers, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower Egypt. How about this one? The word's pronounced cha. The vulture is a silent phonetic complement. The determinative is a building with columns. The word means office or hall. This one is pronounced ja. Given the boat determinative, it obviously has something to do with boats. It's the verb to ferry across or just cross. And this word is pronounced wat. The vulture is once again a silent phonetic complement. The determinative is a road, perhaps with canals on the side, and the word means road. Often this word is simply written as an ideogram. It's much simpler this way. The T under the ideogram is to show that the word is feminine. It's like our word for city, niwit. Remember? Here's one we've talked about. It's pronounced sa and means sun. It's an idiom because we don't know why there's a stroke, so we call it an ideogram. Bet you can figure out the word for daughter. Yes, sat. She doesn't have the stroke, perhaps because she needs the feminine T, and they want the composition of the hieroglyphs to be pleasing, so the T is placed almost on the duck's back. Here's an unusual one, and it's interesting. It has two determinatives. So our pronunciation, all we have to do is sound out the wood column biliteral. Ea. The donkey determinative tells us it means donkey. Now, can you tell me why there's a phallus there? I think the clue is the difference between a donkey and a mule. Any farmers out there? A mule is the product of a male donkey and a female horse. Mules are always sterile. So the phallus shows us it's a donkey, which is non-sterile. Another cool thing about this word, the ancient Egyptians loved onomatopoetic words, words that sound like what they are. For example, their word for cat was mia, and their word for donkey was ea. I think it's onomatopoetic. One last vocabulary word for today. Let's pronounce it. Seshta. That's our potter's kiln, ta, with two phonetic complements, the T and the A. The papyrus scroll tells us it's something abstract, not seen. It's the word for secret. That's quite a bit to absorb for today. Let me give you a two-pronged homework assignment to help you remember all this. Don't worry, it'll come. First, write a line of each of the biliterals we have learned today. Practice your hieroglyphic handwriting. It'll help you remember the sounds. You can follow the steps in our exercise book for the sequences of how to draw them. It's just what I showed you today. Also, start your biliteral list with the signs you've learned today. Finally, let me give you a few phrases or sentences to translate from English to hieroglyphs for next time. Again, it'll give you a chance to practice drawing on new biliterals. First, the maidservant knows the secret. Okay, next, the vizier is in the office. Third, the donkey is in the road. And last, the daughter ferries across in the boat. That's it for now. I'll see you next time.